Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys in a Stack of Comics. We are here to go through our weekly What's in the Stack, the best new comics of the week. Mike and I have been rather busy lately, but we will start getting this back to you weekly on this, hopefully posting on Saturdays at some point. Just go our thoughts on the best new comics of the week. Mike, I know we had a find at the end that has some historical context that you were excited to talk about.
Yes,
Long
yes.
awaited out of reprint one. So we'll go through the new issues and then talk a little bit about that graphic novel that we picked up that you were pretty excited about. Um, I'll start book of the week. Not really a shock. Conan number 23. Um,
Yes.
Zub,
Conan.
Zub and Dagnino. I mean, look, we could sit here and talk about how good the book is and all this as we've done. Mike and I are going to do a longer form video about what's going on in the world of Conan, but it's just a fantastic comic book that comes out every week. You get stuff like this shot here that just gives so much depth and perspective to things, the detail that Dagnino's doing in the art. And this was just a really cool issue as far as showcasing a lot of great action with Conan. You get Zula, who they introduced a few months back, kind of reintroduced in this run. They used him really well in this issue. They're setting up a big event with this, Scourge of the Serpent. And, Mike, you got to talk to Jim Zub on it. I think, Mike, for us, Conan just continues to excel and be the best book every month. For you, I mean, I know you've been a little bit behind on your issues. You've been catching up. Is it still catching you the same way where it's a book where every month you're just enthralled by it?
Always, always. I mean, Conan always delivers. It's so great because, us comic fans, we're hungry for something that we are familiar with, something that we love, but we don't have to get drug into like some kind of continuity kerfuffle. It's just a straightforward sword and sandals story with our favorite barbarian and great writing by Jim Zub, and the art is always delivered. Like I remember when Conan started, we thought like, Brathwaite was, the be all end all, and like they better not switch the artist. But when they switch the artist, it's another amazing artist. I mean, it never suffered whenever they did switch up, and you can imagine the job of art on Conan through Titan is probably a coveted assignment that a lot of artists are just itching to, man, let me try out for, you can just imagine that in the professional world, like, if you were an artist, you'd want that job. You would want it. That and Flash Gordon. I mean, those are classic characters out there in the indie space that are just crushing it. And Conan always delivers.
No,
Always.
Conan, one of the things we'll highlight this when we talk about it in longer form, but I think what this issue does too is, like you said, this is the fourth or fifth artist they've had on this, and that normally drives you crazy. But they've been great with let's finish the arc with the artist, so you never get left high and dry as a reader. And I think the other part is the editorial or whoever's making the decisions finds artists who fit the book instead of just who's the available artist. Everybody who has written or drawn Conan feels like a Conan artist, despite what their other styles may be. I think what's really interesting is a couple months back they had that Dinika O'Brien on for two issues. And I saw art of hers that was in other comics from like that doesn't really look like it's gonna fit well. But her style adjusted when she went into a Conan book where it was like, oh wow, that looks different because it's there. They do that so well, and this issue is just another great example of marrying a writer who loves Conan with an artist who gets what the visceral sort of style of Howard's world should be. It continues to set the standard of it. And I know we talk about it on here all the time, but it's one of those things where as people who love comics, it's hard not to just love that comic every month that it comes out.
I told Jim when I met him, I said, Conan's on track to be the best comic of 2025 too. I said,
No,
so
yeah.
2 years running.
Oh,
But
the
I don't
only
see any
is
competition right
Titan
now.
Sword of Conan is the only other book that's even close. And it's just Titan is doing so well with that property. And whether it's a Jim Zub written one or when they've gotten like Roy Thomas or Jason Aaron even on the Savage Sword books, those have been great. They're just knocking out of the park on all shapes and sizes on that book. So great to see it there. Another indie that I'll highlight, Space Ghost #1, David Pepos and Jonathan Lau on this one. They relaunched Space Ghost. I guess they did 12 issues and then redid another #1. Largely, if you read the first 12, this picks up right where you left off, although they did do a little bit to help kind of launch it for new readers. Again, we did a video, Mike. I think I recorded it last week where we talked about how the indies have been just dominating this space for a while, and we've talked about that more than in just that video. It's crazy to me that Space Ghost has a more consistent comic book than Detective Comics or Action Comics. But this is a great space adventure comic book that gets what you want as a fan. And it delivers on it. I think the other part is Dynamite often gets criticized as a publisher for just having great looking covers, and then you open it and it's like, oh, that's not the person who drew the cover on it.
Yeah.
Space Ghost is the exception to that rule for Dynamite, and that they do some really great drawings. They just get these kind of awesome shots of Space Ghost throughout the comic. It's insane that a Hanna-Barbera superhero from the 60s, who's mainly known for the satire late night Space Ghost Coast to Coast thing, has a better action adventure comic than so many. I mean, Space Ghost has a great spacefaring comic, and the Silver Surfer doesn't. Guardians of the Galaxy doesn't. Adam Warlock doesn't. Nova doesn't. It's crazy that Dynamite is where you can get that from, but kudos to them. David Pepos and Jonathan Lau doing a great job on that. Um, Mike, I know Dynamite's a publisher you like quite a bit. Have you checked out Space Ghost at all so far?
I bought the first issue. I read it. I loved it. And I gave it to my friend Bill, who's an old Space Ghost fan from back in the 60s. I'm like, you gotta read Space Ghost. And so I gave it away. But he loved it.
Yeah, no, hopefully they keep it going, and I think it'd be really great to see it. The only problem I have with Dynamite is the constant renumbering, and I do think it was sort of. I get it. You want the #1, it sells. I think even though it's the best new comic of the week, the only critique I'd have, and this happens with James Bond all the time too, they renumber with a new #1 all the time, and it's like, I get it. That's a cool, fresh approach, but I do think sometimes there is a little power to having like volume 3, volume 4 to people to trace down instead of resetting to
Give it
volume
some legs.
the
Give it
time.
some legs. They'll get there.
Overall, great issue. Got to give them a lot of credit. Last kind of 3 or 4 we'll mention here. Only real Marvel book for this week: Spider-Man and Wolverine #4. I did a video highlighting the first 3 issues of this series last week. This continued to be great. Now the art did change. It's not Kari Andrews again, which again Marvel is seriously issue 4, and we need a replacement artist already. The art, Gerardo Sandoval, it's a little rough. I will say that it is kind of fitting with the Kari Andrews sort of vibe of a more cartoonish look. So that's going to hit with you or it's not. What I will say with this is where this is a good book. If you like Spider-Man and you like Wolverine, you don't need to know anything about their continuity. You basically just need to know who the 2 characters are and what happened in the previous 3 issues. And if you like Wolverine acting a little more visceral and brutal, he is that here. Spider-Man is very, very awesome in these comics. It is so cool to read a Spider-Man comic where he's got some grit and some tough to him, and we see that never quit attitude. They did do a good issue of Amazing Spider-Man a couple weeks back with that, but overall, very satisfying couple issues. Mike, I know you're out on Marvel. I would recommend you check this series out. Of course,
Okay.
you happen to know someone who probably can lend those to you. Uh,
Yeah.
last 2 that I'll sort of spotlight here. Art not going to be for everybody, but this Superman, the Kryptonian Spectrum, a little bit heavy on the price, $5.99. So I understand where it would scare some people away. Basically, they got indie writers. I believe they are the creators of the book. I think Ice Cream Man or something like that. Um, However, this basically, and again, the art's a little bit cartoonish. I think it has a little bit of like a Frank Quietly, somewhat kind of vibe to it. So that's not going to be, and it's not as good as Frank Quietly. But what it basically is, again, a Superman story that picks up Superman as you know him. They discover new variations of kryptonite, and Superman, in an effort to make sure Lex Luthor can't use them on him, decides to enlist Batman to sort of test that kryptonite on him. There's a really cool piece of kryptonite in this book. I think it's like a violet kryptonite that kind of does a time displacement thing. And so Superman has this great 6 or 7 page fight where he's seeing the fight in different orders and a little bit of like a Dr. Manhattan sort of thing. I thought it was a really creative use of kryptonite, creative use of Superman. And again, the kind of comic book that if you just want Superman to act like Superman and not be bogged down by his time displaced children and 75 other survivors of Krypton, you get it here. Batman's suitably cool in this one as well. I would recommend this, even though the art may not be for everybody, but I thought that was really strong. Um, Last two books, kind of continuity driven down. Again, Mike, I know you've yet to pick up your stack, so I'll be turning it to you here to talk about the Blue Beetle one that we have. Aquaman #8, Jeremy Adams. He's this one of the best writers in all of comics. This was a suitably epic conclusion to the first 8 issues of this series. Great fights, great to see Aquaman get some genuinely kind of BA moments in it, and the art suitably kind of capturing him really, really well. Some epic fight scenes. Aquaman's a bit out for vengeance in this, but they also do some really cool things with flashbacks of him remembering his dad and inspiring to be a hero. Jeremy Adams just gets what these heroes need to get them to tick. And so this is a great book. It's really sad to hear the sales on this have not been good. I would definitely recommend if you haven't checked it out and you just want a good superhero comic to read. That's a good one. Last one, and I'll just briefly talk about it. I didn't think it was the greatest issue, but Batman and Robin 24 from Philip Kennedy Johnson wrapped up this long arc that he's had for about 15 issues. I think it was a good conclusion to it. Overall, what I will say about this book and where I like it, as a father, it is great to read a comic that has a father son dynamic that is portrayed in a healthy light, that shows Batman being a good dad, caring about his kid, not leaning into the bat jerk, not be it's great to see a writer emphasize that without in any way compromising Batman's sharpness, his mental acuity, his detective skills, or his planning. I
Right.
hope this book continues. I know sales wise, this is dipped as well. I would love to see Philip Kennedy Johnson get a shot to write the main Batman title or Detective Comics or something like that because he's done a great job there. So that's the main comics this week. Go to this kind of showcase one. Now, I'll preface it by saying price point on this is a little high. I believe $39.99. Although if you go Amazon, you can get it there. However, you are getting about 400 pages, I believe, and some of them have never been reprinted. DC has been doing these DC finest, and this week they finally released one that Mike and I were very excited about. Blue Beetle, the Dan Garrett version of Blue Beetle, and the first few Ted Cord ones as well. So you get some Steve Ditko goodness there. Mike, you're a huge Ditko guy. What did you think about seeing this kind of reprinted in DC given it some attention?
It's amazing. I guess, DC bought the Charlton properties in the early 80s and, started mining that stuff. But for those of you who may not know, Steve Ditko loved working for Charlton. Um, that was his home away from home when he couldn't get work at the big two. He would go to Charlton where they would always take him in. They couldn't pay him the page rate that the big two paid him, but they said, "Sure, Steve, come on back." And he went back and forth from Charlton a few times. But Charlton loved him and respected him. And for a creator that didn't get much respect, it weighs heavy on my heart that, and I'm sure his as well, that he always had a place to go where they didn't, micromanage him. They just let him be Steve. And a lot of magical stuff came out of Steve in his Charlton incarnations, and of course, bringing the Blue Beetle back in the 60s was, I think, a project of his that he was really fond of. And you can tell because of the way, the care, and his storytelling in those stories, you could tell it was special for him. And of course, it's special for all of us, but like you said, it's a lot of those issues are hard to find. They've been out of print for years. You get snippets reprinted here and there, but to
Mhm.
have the collected works is really amazing. And I don't think that Bill knows about that, so I can't wait to tell him because He's going to
Oh,
track that down.
they even having the original Dan Garrett ones. I think it's Joe Gill and Bill Fraccio on it. Those are ones that have never been reprinted from those Charlton days, where you get some of these, and it's interesting to see some of these old panels and just the way some of these old artists drew the characters, even outside of what was defined by Ditko. And I think it's really cool that DC's doing this. They did a Metamorpho one a couple weeks back that was really interesting to read and kind of see some of those older adventures of Metamorpho. And I think that's a cool thing DC's doing with this collection. While the price point's a bit high, they've had one with Plastic Man. It's cool to see some of those characters that, like you said, it's hard to find comics of those characters and to get them reprinted where you kind of get them all together. They're printed on good paper quality. Is it the same as owning the individual issue? Of course not. But it is really cool regardless to see those preserved and read. And so credit to DC Comics. Really
Well,
cool
yeah, I mean,
this
for
week.
the history of it, um, a lot, what's fun about comic book history is a lot of comic book history begins and starts and stops in some of these smaller characters,
Mhm.
and especially like, artists, getting their sea legs under them and really get going. Maybe they became famous for, drawing Superman in the 80s, but back in the 70s, they also drew X, Y, and Z. And, it's fun to see. Case in point, we're talking about Darwin Cook all month long. He got his first DC job in 85 in an obscure short-lived title, and it's just one issue. But Darwin Cook fans know to look for it and love it. But it'll probably never be reprinted, or maybe they'll do a Darwin Cook omnibus or something.
Mhm.
But it's fun to track down that older stuff and see, what Steve was doing. This was after Spider-Man, I believe.
Yeah, 65. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
post
So,
Spider-Man.
he had the falling out with Marvel, and of course, he went back to his old favorite, Charlton. Anytime, Steve, come on back.
Well, and I think the fun thing with scenes, where I got to give DC some credit. Yes, they're reprinting Batmans and things in these series, but it's so easy to find. As a Batman fan, I'm not complaining about the availability of Batman. I want to be very clear on that. But it is so easy to find Batman. It's so easy to find Superman, even the Flash and Green Lantern. Largely, if you want an issue of those characters, it's very easy to find. It might cost you a little bit, but you can find the singular issue or a version of the graphic novel that has it. For Metamorpho, Plastic Man, Blue Beetle, some of these more obscure characters that have, as you said, complex histories with, Charlton used to own them and things like that. It is really cool to see them get the spotlight on it. And that I think the only of these DC finest that bought have been Blue Beetle, Metamorpho, and Plastic Man, just because it's these cool classic DC characters that you forget had their own comics at some point. And it's so interesting to read like Blue Beetle's just the main character. He's not going to be there for two panels and go away. Like he's the star of the show,
Oh yeah.
and
Oh
it's
yeah.
really cool to see that. So a little bit of a blast for the past. We'll say again, preface price points a little high, but that was a cool one that came out this week. And if we gotten any historic comic fans who have a little extra change in your pocket this week and want to pick up something unique, can't beat catching some old Steve Ditko stuff. One of the greatest to ever do it. That'll wrap it up this week, folks, for our best new comics of the week. We will make a better effort to make this a weekly thing that we get to every Saturday. As always, let us know what were the best comics in your stack for the week. If you agree with us, disagree with us, completely okay, folks. We always love seeing your thoughts down below. As always, thank you for watching. God bless you. You have a great rest of your week, folks.
Thanks, everybody.